Have you ever noticed how a man changes after he's been rejected? Not instantly, not in a way anyone applauds, but quietly, almost imperceptibly, like something inside him recalibrates. The night she says, "I don't see you that way." Or maybe, "I think we should just be friends." Or worse, nothing at all. Just silence. He nods, says he understands, tells her it's fine, and on the surface, it is. But inside his brain, this is not interpreted as disappointment, it's interpreted as threat. Because to the human nervous system, rejection has never been neutral. For most of human history, exclusion meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant survival risk. Research has shown that social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The brain does not distinguish sharply between a wound to the body and a wound to belonging. Cortisol rises, dopamine drops, the memory imprints, not as a story, but as a warning. And when the brain detects threat, it adapts. It recalculates risk. It becomes more cautious with trust, more selective with vulnerability, more restrained with hope. So the next time he feels something, he filters it. The next time he wants to try, he hesitates. The next time he opens up less. Rejection doesn't just hurt a man, it subtly reorganizes him. And most men will call it maturity, without realizing it might just be armor. Rejection doesn't just hurt you, it exposes you. You think it's about chemistry, it's not. Your brain reads it as disqualification, not chosen, not preferred, not enough. And the male nervous system does not ignore disqualification. It updates. Belonging has always meant protection. Being chosen has always signaled value. For men especially, selection carries weight. Selection implies competence, desirability, status. So when someone withdraws interest, the system doesn't just register emotional loss, it registers reduction of perceived value, reduction of standing, and the brain responds to reduction the same way it responds to threat. It tightens. Stress chemistry rises, reward circuits dim, motivation fluctuates. Attention shifts towards self-protection. You may not consciously panic, but something inside you becomes more guarded, and then something more subtle happens. The brain begins to revise future strategy. It increases caution around emotional exposure. It lowers automatic optimism. It becomes more calculating. The next time you approach someone, there is more scanning, more internal assessment, more restraint. Not because you're weak, because your system has updated the cost of vulnerability. And here's where most men misunderstand themselves. They think they learned a lesson. But what actually happened is deeper. Their nervous system shifted from openness to efficiency, from instinct to management, from expression to control. They start choosing words more carefully, investing slightly less, waiting for clearer signals, testing before committing, and every adjustment feels rational. It feels mature, it feels strategic, until you realize the strategy was born from pain. And pain, when it becomes strategy, begins to shape identity. That is how rejection reorganizes behavior, not dramatically, but structurally. There's another layer most men won't admit. Rejection doesn't just sting emotionally, it bruises pride, because on some level, being chosen validates worth. It confirms desirability, it confirms standing, and when that confirmation disappears, the ego doesn't just feel disappointed, it feels challenged, so it compensates, sometimes with indifference, sometimes with humor, sometimes with ambition, sometimes with detachment, but compensation is still reaction, and reaction repeated long enough becomes identity. Rejection rarely changes a man in obvious ways. It changes his thresholds. After enough rejection, you don't stop wanting connection. You stop risking humiliation. You tell yourself you've matured. But what actually shifted is tolerance. Tolerance for uncertainty, tolerance for emotional exposure, tolerance for not being chosen. You don't lead with instinct anymore, you lead with calculation. Before you text, you consider leverage. Before you open up, you assess odds. Before you commit, you evaluate how easily you can detach. That feels intelligent, it feels disciplined, but it began as self-protection. Rejection doesn't just bruise emotion, it challenges pride. Because being chosen confirms something fundamental. I am desirable, I am competent, I am enough. When that confirmation disappears, the ego doesn't shatter, it restructures. You say you raised your standards, but what you really raised was your guard. You say you don't chase anymore, but part of you is avoiding the possibility of being dismissed again. You say you're more selective, but you're also less willing to risk exposure, and the shift is subtle enough that you don't question it. You call it growth. You call it boundaries. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's fear in a tailored suit. The more rejection accumulates, the more efficiency takes over. You reveal less, invest slower, detach faster. You convince yourself you operate best alone. Not because you don't want connection, but because reliance feels like vulnerability. And vulnerability now carries historical data. Some men convert rejection into ambition. They build bodies, careers, status, influence, not purely from inspiration, but from a quiet internal contract. I will never feel that replaceable again. Achievement becomes insulation, success becomes proof, control becomes safety. And none of it looks unhealthy on the surface. It looks composed, strategic, stable. Until intimacy requires something strategy cannot provide. Unfiltered presence, risk without guarantees, emotional exposure without leverage. That's where the adaptation reveals itself, because the same protection that reduced pain also reduced depth. Rejection didn't make you weaker. It made you guarded. It didn't destroy your desire. It reorganized it around safety. And if safety becomes the highest value, intimacy becomes negotiable. That is how rejection stops being a memory and starts becoming architecture. Rejection forces adaptation. That part is automatic. What happens after that isn't. Most men default to armor, not because they're weak, because armor works. It reduces humiliation. It lowers exposure. It keeps pride intact. You detach faster, trust slower, invest strategically. You call it discipline, you call it standards, and on the surface it looks strong. But armor edits you. It filters what you feel before anyone else can reject it. It turns desire into calculation, connection into risk management. And the more refined the armor becomes, the harder it is to notice you're wearing it. The alternative isn't softness, it's integration. Integration means you recognize what rejection activated in you, where pride stepped in, where safety became more important than depth, where you started optimizing for not losing instead of fully living. And then you make a conscious choice, not to be reckless, not to ignore patterns, but to stop letting old rejection dictate new connection. Because here's the truth. If every interaction is filtered through protection, you may avoid humiliation, but you will also avoid being fully known. And eventually, protection becomes isolation with better branding. Rejection will update your nervous system. That's biology. Whether it becomes your personality is awareness. You can become harder, or you can become clearer. Both look strong from the outside. Only one preserves depth. Rejection doesn't define you, but if you never examine how it shaped you, it will quietly define how you love. If this resonated, don't scroll away from it. Ask yourself where rejection made you guarded and where it made you sharper. Most men never look that closely. If you want more conversations like this, the kind that go beneath the surface, stay here. That's what we do.